Hey guys, Angie to break down UFC 305, Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya. I have to do this all again because I dumped the audio, but that's okay. Yeah, I think a lot of us probably would feel that Sean Strickland should be a part of this in some shape or form. The last fight with Dricus du Plessis was very, very close, and Izzy got dominated by Sean. So it's a little bit of a slap in the face for true hardcore fans that know what they saw in those fights. But that's okay because I'm pretty sure he'll be facing the winner. It does add a bit of complexity. It's funny how meritocracy doesn't always work. People say, oh, Izzy's really big star, and he is, but so is Sean. So is Dricus. I guess they all are, but it seems a little bit bizarre, this situation we've got. But that's okay. I'm going to go into the rest of the card now before I get to the main event. First fight of the night, we have the Leech Li Jingliang versus Carlos Prates, who's relatively new in the UFC. He's a very quick finisher. He's on an 11-fight win streak. He's been very active. He's only been in the UFC a year, but he's had 3 fights and 3 first-round finishes, if I'm not mistaken. The Leech, on the other hand, he has been around a long time. He's a bit of a vet now. He's slowing down. 2 out of his last 3 fights were losses. He won against Muslim Salikov in his last win, which was 2 fights ago, and he lost to Daniel Rodriguez. Before that, it was Khamzat Chimaev. So yeah, I think Leech is slowing down a bit. I can't really see him winning this fight. He might, but I think that the UFC have matched him up against this Carlos guy who is taking a step up in competition, but I think that he will handle himself nicely against the Leech. It may be a little bit tougher than his last wins. It may take him a bit longer to finish it, but I think he'll get it done either in the first or second round by KO. So I think the odds are pretty accurate on this one. Tai Tuivasa versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik. I think the odds should be a lot more even in this fight just because we know they're both strikers. They don't really have much of a ground game, so that's been their hindrance in a lot of their fights. They just haven't been able to compete on the ground, and so people that have any grappling will take them down and they'll lose the fight that way in most cases. I mean, for Tuivasa, sure, he got knocked out by Sergey Pavlovich. That was a very quick turnaround after he got KO'd by Cyril Gane. So I wouldn't really play into that too much. He got subbed by his last 2 opponents, Alexander Volkov and Marcin Tybura. And yeah, that's how they beat him. So Tai is legit on the feet. He's also become a lot more technical as well, even though he is a brawler. So I would not count him out in this fight. Jairzinho Rozenstruik's more of a technical kickboxer. And he also can be a little bit more gun shy, especially in his last fight. He took his sweet time to finish his opponent that he could have finished maybe in the first round. So I'm a little surprised the odds are in favor of Jairzinho. I would, have them even. I think Tui is a really good bet to make just because I'm sure he really wants to win and it's in Australia. I just think people are counting him out, and he's been through a bit of a rough patch, sure, but his unorthodox striking, his brawling, I think will really get to Jairzinho, and I think he'll get the KO even in the first round. So I've got, Tui by KO in the first round. Because I just think Jairzinho Rozenstruik's a little bit meek and a little bit, sometimes when he's really confident though, he will go out there like he did against Chris Daukaus, but Chris Daukaus is a smaller guy. He's not going to be able to knock you out, but Tui will, and I think that's going to affect his confidence, and I think Tui's going to just go for it. So Tui by KO in the first round. Featured bout. I've been really looking forward to Dan Hooker's return. I'm sure a lot of us have. Dan Hooker is the man. He's a monster. He will go through hell and back to achieve his goal. He is one tough bastard. His last loss was to Arnold Allen at featherweight. That doesn't really count for anything in my opinion because Dan is a huge lightweight and he would have absolutely had no conditioning left, no endurance or anything left after that weight cut. So I don't really count that. Before that, he lost to Islam Makhachev at late notice. I think it was a 3-day notice to fight Islam, and he got Kimura. I don't really count that either. Dan Hooker does have some decent grappling defense as well. I actually think people are really overlooking him in this situation, even though he hasn't really always composed himself really well. I think that he's really tied a few things together in the last couple of fights and been fighting a lot smarter. Okay, the fight against Jalen Turner was him withstanding a lot of punishment, but that's a natural gift, but I think he's worked on the other stuff that he wasn't so good at. And I think that he's quite capable of knocking out Mateusz Gamrot. Yeah, Dan Hooker's a dangerous striker. He is coming off that broken ulnar injury, and he did have a setback with that as well. He thought it was recovered, and then he had to pull out of a fight. So I'm guessing it's fully healed now. People are just underestimating him. He almost KO'd Dustin in their fight a few years ago, and that was a few years ago. I think Dan Hooker's a much better fighter now, much more complete fighter. And even though Dan Hooker's been around a while, I think that he's probably still kind of in his prime because he has looked so good. He's only 34. He just has a heck of tread, perhaps. Mateusz Gamrot, on the other hand, he's a wrestler, that's his main thing, but he's not really a threat for the finish anywhere. He hasn't really knocked anyone out lately. He hasn't subbed anyone. His last loss was to Beneil Dariush, and he beat Rafael Fiziev, but that was due to a knee injury, so I don't count that. His last win was RDA. That doesn't really mean anything now. RDA is old, and even though he's really good, it doesn't really count for anything when you talk about elite lightweight, so I don't really count that for anything. And a split decision win over Jalen Turner, that was a very close fight. Arguably, Jalen won that. So I feel like Mateusz hasn't quite lived up to his potential. He's not as good as what people were making him out to be. I think he did beat Arman in that fight, Arman Sarukian, but he just hasn't had the right matchups, or he just hasn't really shown, I guess, the right ingredients to be a top 5 lightweight or to be a title contender. So I think people are overlooking Dan because everyone really respects Mateusz, and they should. Yeah, his only finishes are over really low-ranked guys, and this is the elite lightweight bracket. So I don't think he'll be able to finish Dan. I think this is a really good fight. I would probably still favour Mateusz by a small margin, but I would definitely think Dan Hooker's a really good bet to make for the underdog. There's really great value on him. But I've actually got Dan Hooker winning this by a finish, probably in the 3rd or 2nd round. I'll say 3rd round because Mateusz is pretty tough as well. So yeah, I got Dan Hooker by knockout in the 3rd round. And I think it's quite a possibility, a lot more than what people are giving it. These odds are really crazy. Okay, co-main event. This is going to be probably the fight of the night. If Dan Hooker and Mateusz isn't fight of the night, this is probably going to be fight of the night. Kai Kara France versus Steve Erceg, Astro Boy Erceg. I think I said in my last video where with Steve challenging for the title and falling short against Pantoja, he probably shouldn't do a quick turnaround just because he did have a big weight cut and it's only been, I think, 3 months. That was in May. Yeah, it's a very quick time, especially after a big loss like that. I think it's a little bit better when fighters take a bit of time after losing their title shot because it is a lot to process. But everyone's different. Before that, he KO'd Matt Schnell, and obviously that was a big step up in competition to fight Pantoja for the belt. And before that, it was a unanimous decision against Alessandro Costa. Steve Erceg does have the advantage, I guess, all round because he does have that BJJ threat and he's very slick at getting submissions on the ground. He's got great boxing, but he does leave himself vulnerable on the inside defensively. But he is a little bit bigger than Kai and he does have a bigger weight cut, and it's been not all that long since his title fight loss. But he is fighting in his hometown, so there could be a bit of an advantage there. For Kai, he's really experienced. He's been around so long. He's had, how many fights? Like 35 MMA fights, and that's not including his kickboxing fights. That's a lot for a flyweight. He's had a lot of wear and tear for a flyweight. Stylistically, though, I do think that he matches up quite well against Astro Boy as long as he doesn't get taken to the ground. That's going to be where we can see who's going to win the fight or not, I think. It'd be very telling. I think if Astro Boy can get him to the ground, it's going to be over very quickly. But Kai, I think he's still very determined, and I think he's not going to give up so easily, which is going to make it a great fight. Yeah, I think Kai could be a live underdog in this fight just because of all the circumstances. I think it should be a little bit more even. Still should favor Astro Boy, but not by that much. So I think it's a fun bet to make if you do believe in Kai. I think that he could catch Erceg on the inside. If he can get in there and make it ugly, he can catch Erceg and knock him out. Just because Erceg's he had that weight cut not too long ago, he's going to have to make it again. I think it's a good opportunity. If Kai goes in there and makes it really ugly and gets in his face, kind of like how Bilal did to Leon, I think he has a chance, just as long as he doesn't get taken down. That's kind of the area I just don't know. The other thing about Kai is that his last loss was actually arguably, I think a lot of us thought he won that fight. And the loss to Brandon Moreno, he was losing that fight to start with, but then he started to take over and then he got caught with a liver kick. So they're not bad losses to have. So I think people are looking at his record and be like, oh, no, Kai's, an old vet washed up now. No. I think he has a very good chance of winning this fight. He has the experience that Astro Boy doesn't have. Maybe he's not as talented all round as an MMA artist, but I think Kai has a really good chance of winning this. So I would not be surprised to see the upset in this fight. But ultimately, I am going to edge with Steve Erceg just because he is really slick at getting the sub. So I'm going to go with Astro Boy here by a submission in the first round. If it goes any longer than that, if it goes into the second or later rounds, I'll pick Kai for the upset to knock him out. Although it is 3 rounds, isn't it? Yeah, so I'll just go with Astro Boy by first round submission. But I would like to see Kai win too, because I really love both these guys. This is a really good fight just because it's a fight for the fans and it's really entertaining. It should be a really good fight. I hope it goes to the later rounds. Okay, the main event, Dricus Du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya. Yeah, I think Sean Strickland should be part of this. I think Sean Strickland is potentially the best middleweight in the world. I just think the circumstances didn't favor him. He just became champion. Had a quick turnaround in 3 months to fight Dricus, who gets how many months now to fight again? Maybe 6 months. They should have given Sean a bit more time, and arguably he still won that fight. So I feel a bit about this fight. I'm like, well, I hope you guys fuck each other up a lot, even though I like them still. But I hope they really fuck each other up so that Sean can come in and knock them out when he fights for the belt. I just feel like it doesn't sit right with me, but whatever. It's somewhat interesting. It's a good fight for Dricus to have, because if he knocks out Izzy or wins against Izzy, that's really good for his resume. For Izzy, he's already won the belt before, twice, so what's the point of fighting Dricus? I would have liked to see Izzy rematch Sean. Izzy even said himself, oh, it's not about the belt, but I think he's avoiding Sean. As much as I love Izzy, he's avoiding Sean and he isn't respecting him. I know he does deep down, but he's ignoring him because I think he probably hopes that Sean will get beaten by someone so he doesn't have to deal with him. And I think that's the real fight people want to see. From the perspective of DDP, yeah, I think anyone who's a fan of him would want to see him beat Izzy, but it just doesn't seem like it's much to gain for Izzy, if I'm being honest. There's not really much to gain. Maybe he's more motivated to fight Dricus and he thinks there's more ways to beat him, and he's probably right. He probably does match up quite well stylistically with Dricus. But Izzy's at the end of his prime, arguably. Dricus is young and hungry. He's very switched on and he's very focused as a champion, so I think he's going to be very difficult to beat. I just don't think there's a lot for Izzy to gain. So it's a very interesting situation, because I think there would have been a lot more to gain fighting Strickland for Izzy. But having said that, maybe Izzy wants to beat Dricus and then gain a bit more confidence back so that he can face Strickland, because it is a style that he struggles with. And he probably wants a bit more time to establish a proper game plan to deal with that style. This is kind of interesting as well, because we haven't seen Izzy since that loss to Sean Strickland. We don't know what new styles he's been developing to take down DDP. We don't know what styles DDP's been training to take down Izzy. So it's going to be a battle of the game plans. A lot of Izzy's fights tend to be that way. Both the teams are so creative with how they manage these game plans. It's really going to be who happens to have the most effective one, probably over the skills of the fighters or even the wills or the endurance and all of that. I think that they're both very determined. I would still give the edge, though, to Dricus mentally, just because I think he has a lot more to prove. And also because his last fight to Strickland was arguably Strickland's win. He probably really wants to cement a solid win here. He probably wants to get a knockout. So let's look at Dricus. He's pretty big for middleweight. There's no way he could do a 3-month turnaround like Strickland did. But I guess Strickland's quite big too now. But I think the difference is that Sean is willing to take risk, whereas someone like DDP won't take a risk that is going to hinder him, which is smart, but it's not likable from a fan's perspective. But that's okay. He wants to, win. Dricus is on a 9-fight win streak, which is very impressive for middleweight. He has a very unorthodox, weird style, and he's very good at implementing the game plan. His team is very creative. He's focused, confident, and he's collected. He doesn't seem to get emotional, and he's very grounded. He's very down to earth, which makes him very complete as a champion. He's unwavered by trash talk, and he doesn't get into all that emotional cringe. And I think that's kind of what will give him a bit of an advantage against Izzy. Unless Izzy can get super creative and somehow get inside DDP's head, I can't really just see that happening. I think DDP might say something that Izzy might take out of context, but I think he's very honest when he says, I don't care what they think of me. And sometimes that can be a bit off-putting to hear as a fan because we want to see back and forth banter, but I really believe that DDP is grounded in himself and that he doesn't really give a that makes him dangerous to deal with, because a lot of the best fighters, especially Izzy, he uses a lot of that trash talk to get inside people's heads, even though he doesn't like getting it back. That can be a weakness as well because of that. That's how Sean got inside his head. Because Izzy is clever, but there are certain things that do affect him. Yeah, so I've had my little rant about Sean Strickland. I'll just let that go for now. So the wins for Dricus, Sean Strickland, very close fight. Very close fight. TKO, Robert Whittaker. Hated that when that happened. TKO, Derek Brunson. Dricus du Plessis is good. And now that he's a champion, he's going to be even better. I don't think he should be an underdog against Izzy at this stage in Izzy's career. I think it should be more even. DDP is a big, strong middleweight. He is a bigger middleweight, so he's going to be harder to knock out. Unless he has a bad weight cut, that could be probably what Izzy is hoping for because he is big. He's still young though. He's only 30. He's in his prime. I think he's hungrier. Let's look at Izzy. So Izzy's been out since he lost to Sean, which was maybe a year ago. This is his longest layoff. That could be a good or a bad thing. He seems to be in a good space mentally, but he's kind of been here, done that, and I also think that he doesn't have a lot to gain from this fight. He said he's not interested in belts, he's just interested in opponents, but yeah. I mean, okay. I know that he is stylistically more interested in fighting DDP over Sean, let's say. Apart from the Sean Strickland loss, he knocked out Alex Pereira. In that fight, he was actually losing it before he got the knockout. And before that, he got knocked out by Alex Pereira in a fight that he was winning. I feel like Izzy has had a bit of a mental lapse in his last couple of fights. But I think a lot of it was more to do with the style of Sean, for example, in his last fight. And he was not winning in the last Alex Pereira fight. I think a small part of that is that Izzy's burnt out. He doesn't care anymore. And even though he may feel like he needs to regain something here, I just feel like there's not much for him to gain. Although Izzy does have this special ability to win fights. He's one of those fighters that we saw it when he won against Alex Pereira. He has this special spiritual ability that comes out every now and then, which makes it a bit more interesting. If he wasn't that kind of fighter, I'd be like, oh no, Izzy's not going to win. But this does make it even, in my opinion. So yeah, the odds are a bit out of whack. I would have it equal. I think Dricus should be the favourite, if anything. Yeah, I'll probably have it the other way around. I just think, it's just a passing of the guard moment. Izzy's been there, done that. Dricus is hungry. He still needs to prove himself. And when you still need to prove yourself as a fighter, that's all you need to win. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Izzy have that spite, right? All the wrongs that he feels, and he does get very emotional in that way, but sometimes that's very powerful for him. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Izzy get a surprising knockout, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Dricus win. I can see a few things happening. I can see Dricus knocking out Izzy in the mid-rounds, or I can see Izzy catching Dricus in the mid-rounds. I can see either of them knocking each other out. Don't think Izzy will win the decision, as stupid as that sounds. I feel like Dricus has more of a chance to get the decision just because he has a more sense of urgency. We could also end up seeing something very similar to Israel Adesanya, Kelvin Gastelum as well, if they have the endurance and the conditioning to keep it up. So this is a really hard fight to pick, but I can't deny Dricus du Plessis with what he needs to prove for himself. I just think he has everything together, and I think it's going to be very hard for Izzy to win this. As much as I love Izzy and would love him to win, I've got DDP here by a decision. Yeah, so that's my pick. Obviously, it's a lot of conflict of interest for me because, yeah, I love Izzy and I love Sean. They're both two of my favorite fighters. And how can you not respect DDP as well? He's really cool. So, yeah, I've got DDP winning this by a decision. Although I would love to see Izzy get a really cool, sneaky knockout. But I just think that DDP has all these ducks in a row. So, yeah, that's about it. Thanks for coming by and watching. Enjoy the fights and see you around the traps. Enjoy.